Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's so fun every week to just see those numbers populating on the screen after we hit start. Welcome back to many of you. I know that there are a lot of people registered who've been following us over the series of the webinar series thus far. If you're just joining us for the first time, thanks for joining in. My name is Haley Ross, and I work for the Columbia Mountains Institute, or CMI for short. And I'm joined here with Kendall Benish with the Kootenai Conservation Program, or KCP for short. And we've joined forces again in what is the 8th season of CMI's CRUD Talks, or the Columbia Region Ecological Discussions, and KCP's 10th Winter Webinar Series. Now, before we get started, I would like to just pause and acknowledge that the region in which both of our organizations work is in the unceded homeland of the Sinixt, the Shuswap, the Ktunaxa, and the Syilx Okanagan peoples, who have stewarded and cared for this land, water, and all living things since time immemorial. Now, as we've been doing in the webinars thus far, this is a really great opportunity for all of you to introduce yourself via the chat and also share which Indigenous territories you're zooming in from today. And as you do that, I'm going to run through a bit more material. So this season's webinars will explore the theme of wildlife corridors and ecological connectivity. We're welcoming 8 speakers who will discuss the theme from different perspectives, providing a wide view that can help inform conservation of connected and resilient landscapes in the Columbia Basin. This year's series is financially supported by the Columbia Basin Trust and also LGL Limited. Thanks very much to these organizations for ensuring that we can continue to offer this series free of charge. And thanks to all of you for tuning into the fourth talk of this series today, where fire mitigation specialist Larry Price will present his work with the First Nations Emergency Services Society and how they work with First Nations to develop an integrated spatial database and other planning tools to support collaborative planning. Larry will discuss how integrated fire management planning provides a framework to develop and implement management strategies that will maintain and enhance ecological integrity and function of regional connectivity corridors through time and space. So I can see that folks are introducing themselves. Thanks very much. As you continue to do that, I'm just going to take a moment to introduce CMI. So CMI is a nonprofit society and an association working for people who are working in various fields of ecology. We provide professional development opportunities in the form of conferences, courses, webinars, of course. Our courses teach skill-based research techniques, and our larger events take on kind of more complex land management conundrums. Our website, of course, is the best place to learn more about CMI, and it contains great resources such as these recordings, but also proceedings documents and recordings from all of our major talks. You can find that at cmiae.org. Now I'm going to hand it over to Kendall.
Thank you, Haley. My name is Kendall Benish, and I'm joining you on behalf of Kootenai Conservation Program, or KCP. KCP is a diverse network of more than 85 land and water conservation stewardship groups, federal, provincial, and local governments, First Nations, land trusts, agricultural producers, and educational institutions who all contribute to conserving our region. The purpose of KCP's partnership is to cooperatively conserve and steward landscapes that sustain biodiversity and naturally functioning ecosystems, and to generate the support and resources that are needed to advance this effort, which includes building technical knowledge in webinars like this. We're very excited to be hosting this webinar series again with Haley and with CMI, and we'd like to give an additional thanks to all of our program sponsors, without whom we really wouldn't be able to support this type of work. Just a couple housekeeping details from me, and then we'll get rolling. So this webinar is being recorded, and it'll be posted within a week to both CMI's event webpage and to KCP's winter webinar webpage, and you're welcome to share it accordingly. You can also utilize, we'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, and please use the Q&A function in your Zoom toolbar. So you'll see the Q&A button there to add a question to the queue, and we'll do our best to make our way through them. You can utilize the upvote button in the Q&A. So if you see a question in there that's similar to yours or that you'd also like answered, you can press the thumbs up icon beside that question and it'll move it to the top of the queue. And that's it. Back to you, Haley.
Okay, great. Thank you. So now the moment you've all been waiting for, I'd like to introduce Larry Price. I'm just going to read a short bio and then I'll hand it over to him. So Larry is a registered professional forester, as well as a forest technologist with 50 years experience working throughout BC. Current responsibilities include working with First Nations to identify community needs and support access to funding for implementing measures that reduced wildfire risk and increase community resilience. Over his career, Larry has worked with the provincial government at the district, regional, and headquarters level, and for the past 12 years with the First Nations Emergency Services Society. So Larry, thanks so much for taking the time to prepare this talk for us today. I'll let you take it over.
Okay, thank you. I'll see if I can just start my video and share, and
Perfect.
hopefully it all works out here. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay, good. Well, I'm very pleased to be here and to represent FNESS and provide an overview of integrated fire management planning and how it might mitigate the risk to the ecological integrity and function of connectivity corridors, as well as touch on some other issues in terms of wildfire mitigation around the built environment. So I just want to also thank Caleb Rempel of FNESS and Dane Cox, GIS analyst, for helping put together this ArcMap story presentation. It's come a long way from the overhead projectors and Mylar screens with the colored pens that I did earlier in my career. So thanks. Just wanted to acknowledge those folks. I just wanted to say, just want to acknowledge the ancestral homeland and unceded territory of all First Nations in BC. FNESS is working across the entire province, and you can see the traditional territories map, throughout the province as we kind of zoom in here that goes across the border into Alberta, as well as the Yukon. So a very large area. FNESS has supports 205 bands throughout the province. That's our mandate to support them. FNESS currently has 86 full-time and casual staff currently expanding. I know when I started with FNESS in 2012, there were 6 of us. And so a big shout out to Wayne Schnitzer, our executive director, soon to be retired, who's done a masterful job in terms of building FNESS, getting it to where it is today. So FNESS's mandate is to assist First Nations to develop safer and healthier communities by providing the programs under the 4 pillars of emergency management planning, consistent and based on the Sunday framework as adopted by the BC government. Today, we're going to talk about the overview of integrated fire management planning framework or process. We're going to explain the linkages to a project initiative of reducing risk of severe wildfire in the southeast corner of British Columbia. This area, is covering about 2.8 million hectares in this part of the province, as well as another mapping product that's going to support future wildfire resiliency, covering about 10.2 million hectares through South Central BC. And I hope to, as we talk about integrated spatial database, it's really the real engine behind this, making sure we have access to all, spatial information to support our business needs, and how this information really links and supports the 4 pillars of emergency management planning: mitigation, preparedness, recovery, and response. And linked to this, to propose a governance structure framework, one that currently exists, one that needs to be created to help us mitigate risk to ecosystems and the built environment, as well as ensuring that we have feedback and adjustments. FNESS does work for First Nations First Nations are our clients, and we work on their behalf, and we want to make sure that all the work we're doing is in line and has full support of First Nations communities. And lastly, to really identify the linkage and synergies to support related initiatives such as landscape level planning, old growth strategy, BC First Nations workforce strategy, and just, linking to biodiversity management, as we move forward. So start off with a problem statement, and current wildfire mitigation programs are focused on project-based planning. You apply for grants from, federal, provincial, regional kind of programs, and, to do various projects that take into account at the project level when you develop your prescriptions. They do look at all the resource values, but these do not look at the holistic landscape in terms of planning and designing these treatments from multi-programs, taking into account multi-resource planning through space and time. And we need to do that. And we need to make sure that they consider, over the long haul, like not, just the first 5-10 years, but we look out 200 years, 7 generations, as we hear a lot from First Nations about that planning. And that's what we're attempting to do by implementing the IFM framework. So key piece of IFM framework components is the assembly of an integrated spatial database and the ability to have the tools to access, share, and distribute that information. And then also being able to use spatial and temporal models to forecast potential impacts to the values in the built and natural environment. When I talk about built environment, I'm really talking about residential infrastructure, critical infrastructure, highways, roads, transmission lines, those type of things. And again, we'll talk about the establishment of regional and local governance bodies to identify and confirm strategies and actions, and making sure that we have effectiveness monitoring processes in place to make sure that we can support adaptive management. We're continuously improving on our management strategies as we learn and implement activities on the land base. And then lastly, identify prioritize projects at scale beyond just the project by project level, but looking across the land base at projects that link and are harmonized. So we'll talk a little bit about the integrated spatial database. What you're looking at here is just an area around Cranbrook. You can see the St. Mary's First Nation, or sorry, the reserve in the middle, Acum. And then, so we're just going to zoom in here a little bit. And what you're seeing here in the darker, sorry, the shaded areas is the wildland urban interface zones that many of you likely are familiar with. So these are areas that have been identified on the proximity, structure density and the proximity to that. If we see the fine line here, that's based on 6 structures per square kilometer proximity. And then we've got the larger WUI area here that goes out to 2 kilometers. And a lot of these WUI areas are kind of linked to applying for various, funding sources, like to get grants, if structures, if they meet minimum structure densities and they're in the WUI. So as another area that we look at is the existing fuel treatments that have happened around the land base. So right in the middle of the screen here, we're looking at the Cranbrook Regional Airport and a strategic wildfire prevention initiative treatment that took place, let's see, intake year 2016, and this was Strategic Wildfire Prevention Initiative Project number 679. So as part of the integrated spatial database, we're assembling all the treatments that have occurred over the years, from 2004 to present time, so that we have an idea of where the treatments take place. So we're working diligently to get that together with a large number of organizations, municipalities. We'll be working with the BC Wildfire Service, Ministry of Forest to get this completed. One thing that's really striking is when we look at integrated information on the land base, we start to look at where did fires occur on the land base, and one of the key pieces of information we can look at historical fires on the land base. And so if you look at these, I believe the records here are probably from 1919, and you can see that a large part of the area, we see Kimberley, Cranbrook, is covered with areas that have had wildfires on them. So if we look and zoom in here on the area that has the green line around it, this was from 2023, the wildfire that occurred on Ackham Community, the St. Mary's wildfire, and burned 4,640 hectares. So very useful information to have. So if we kind of look over here, this fire occurred in 1960, and it was lightning caused, and it was again over 4,000 hectares. So very useful information as you start to look at where the existing wildland urban interfaces are, where the fires have historically spread across the land base. As we kind of zoom in here a little bit more, I talked about, this is a very busy slide here. So it shows the WUI areas, but the point is we wanted to kind of look at some of the built environment and why it's important to kind of map and locate it, and how geospatial information really helps us in this regard. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. This area here is on Ackham Reserve. We're going to zoom in here and look at some structures. So one thing FNESS has been working at is we realize in many First Nations communities, we might not have structure densities that, have the mapping for WUI around them. Like they might be less than 6 structures per square kilometers. So as part of our database assembly, we are identifying every single structure on every reserve in British Columbia, and actually, buffering them with the fire smart zones, so that we can use this information and support First Nations on all 4 pillars of emergency management planning. So if we talk about this, we can see these individual structures here that my cursor is going over. We can look at this in terms of preparedness. So have we had a home ignition zone assessment? Like, what is the ignition susceptibility of the structure taking place on it? Have we developed, or what is the potential for doing structure protection planning here? Is there a need for doing fire smart neighborhood assessments? And we have the ability through our technology. We have a system called Lightship that allows us to go out and actually collect this information in the field, do our home assessments in terms of ignition susceptibility. And this is all entered into an integrated spatial database. Has this house had a smoke alarm installed in it? What's happened with education and awareness in this community? All as part of the integrated spatial database. And then we start to look at, with respect to the fire smart zones that are actually generated for every one of the structures, we have the measures been implemented to reduce structure ignition susceptibility. As there an opportunity to have these folks applied for the Fire Smart rebate program, all of this in the database. And then we get to the issue of kind of response. So we have, we're assembling all the information around where have all the previous fuel treatments done in and around the communities to support suppression activities. So we've got also rapid fire smart assessments and actions. So one of the things that we have done previously is we'll deploy teams out if a fire is in or around the community, it's been affected by an evacuation order or alert. We'll deploy teams out to actually do rapid fire smart assessments in and around the structure, and if need be, deploy our teams that work within FNESS to do rapid fire smart mitigation. And, so basically going in there and throwing everything that's, flammable or could be an ignition source for 10 meters around the structure. And then work with the incident command teams with the Ministry of Forest and the sprinkler protection unit folks, and implement kind of treatments here like sprinkler protection systems on the structure to save it. And this was deployed in 2021 around the White Lake fire in, with the Okanagan Indian Band. And actually it was responsible for saving many, many structures. Another important piece of information around the 4 pillars is recovery planning. So being able to go in here, if a wildfire has occurred and damaged the structure, we do rapid damage assessments, loading this information right into the spatial database. This structure has been damaged, you can't occupy it, or it's been totally destroyed. It also then allows us to link this geospatial information and work with the bands and the other organizations supporting recovery to say, well, who lived there? Did they have pets? Do we know, have they applied for evacuee status? Are they eligible for disaster financial assistance? If not, then maybe we can get in with donation funds to help and support them. So for all of the 4 pillars, having this geo-referenced information is extremely, extremely valuable. Just wanted to make that point. Another piece of key information that we have in the database is administrative boundaries. Now, we all know that fire and wildfire behavior doesn't necessarily, it's not affected by administrative boundaries. Wildfires go across administrative boundaries, but this is a real key piece of information that we need to have in the system as we plan and develop, kind of identify priority treatment areas. Is that many of our funding sources, federal, provincial, and regional funding sources, the eligible activities are linked to some of, is it on reserve land? Is it on provincial crown land? Is it on municipal land? So in order for us to kind of apply for the appropriate funding that we can leverage across various programs, we need to know where all the administrative boundaries are. So a very key piece of information. Another one, we're just giving you a taste of some of the data in the database. So then we look at all the issues surrounding, we've all heard about old growth. So we've got, legally defined old growth areas. We've got technical advisory panel areas of old growth. We've got non-legal areas of old growth, all of which we need to kind of consider in our planning. And so again, as part of the integrated database, we can actually kind of look at around the land base, what is this old growth area that's been identified? How big is it? It's a non-legal one that this one just seems to sit in provincial parks, Kootenay Provincial Parks, a provincial park, that old growth. So just an example of needing to know where all these various values exist throughout the land base. Then, of course, we've got consumptive use watersheds, domestic watersheds that are used for irrigation, consumptive use watersheds that are used for our water supplies. Very key piece of information that we need to know and plan and design for. These are some of the watersheds that are established and designated around the Cranbrook area. And then, of course, we've got all the other things like, rare and endangered species, ungulate winter range that we need to consider in our planning. We can just take a poke at this one right here and see what comes up. And let's see, long-billed curlew. So just, it's a flag to tell us that these species exist and that they need to be considered with respect to our planning. Which this one comes up here is, I think, to do with badgers here. There's a lot of issues with badgers in the East Kootenays and other areas. So again, just an example, like with the database that we've assembled, that we can kind of link in and turn on any of these data layers and look at the type of values and issues that need to be incorporated and considered as we develop plans, wildfire mitigation plans for these areas. And again, I just touched on a very small part of it. There's, the cultural and heritage building potential sites, terrain hazard information. That's all part of the data that we're assembling. Again, critical infrastructure, ignition assessments, emergency management plans, evacuation routes. We have our building into the database. We've got the connectivity corridors that you heard that Dr. Michael Proctor talked about in the first session. So all that information is being loaded into our integrated spatial database. And then what's really important to then consider is, like, as we layer all this information on top of one another, where are there opportunities, for us, to implement treatments to get a common objective, right? Where are our desired future conditions similar? And we know that from the work we've done, particularly in the drier ecosystems, natural disturbance type forest, that when we do fire maintain ecosystem restoration treatments or a fuel treatment, they look very similar in terms of the desired outcome. So there's opportunity for us to apply and utilize various programs to do treatments at scale and get, and get more bang for our buck. And I'll talk a little bit more about this as we move forward with some specific examples that you're likely all aware of. Some of the spatial products that I talked a little bit about early on that's going to help us with respect to our tactical, strategic, and operational planning is an initiative that's happening, that's being led by Bob Gray, that many of you have heard. That's working with a really good core team, Dr. Matthew Barbadeau, Lori Daniels. We've got Jen Barron, PhD candidate. They're also working with Paul Hesberg to do modeling, fire modeling on an area that's about 2.8 million hectares that covers TFL 14, as well as the Invermere TSA and Cranbrook TSA, 2.8 million hectares. So some of the inputs for the fire modeling, they're using LiDAR data to derive, the fuel type information. Canfor is a partner in this project, and so they've applied a lot of the LiDAR data, for inputs on weather, terrain, ignitions. They're using a model called FLAMAP. That's a fire modeling tool that's been deployed and used in the States. I believe the group in the Slocan is also using FLAMAP to do modeling. So one of the, the outputs what we're going to get is, fire size, like what are the likely areas that we're going to have severe fires occur given different climate change scenarios, thresholds in terms of climate change of 1.5, to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and show us where fires are likely to occur from the modeling exercise. And then from there, we're going to work with technical teams as well as other folks. This information will all be shared out to identify priority treatment areas. Where should we focus our efforts in terms of priority treatments across the land base? Another major project that we're working on to support integrated fire management planning is to create a map of resilient forest conditions in the BC interior, mainly focused on the drier ecosystem, NDT4, NDT3, and with a lens on climate change. How are these likely to shift? So an area that we might have today that's classified as kind of open forest might be moving to open range. And so it might not be in our best interest to plant trees there. Or if an area that's best in the state of open forest, and right now the existing condition is that it's got a lot of ingrowth and trees around it, This could be a priority area for us to have an ecosystem restoration treatment or field treatment to kind of to get rid of that ingrowth and leave the larger trees, you know, the ponderosa pine, larch that existed in the past, and plan and design for more resilient landscapes in the future. This is just a map that I thought I would put up that's really interesting when we talk about the wildland urban interface. And likely this is just a screenshot that we took from the provincial strategic threat analysis information, which was a great initiative to, you know, when the whole SWIPE program started after the 2003 wildfire review, you know, to identify areas around communities that we should be looking at and focusing at for doing field treatments. But one thing I wanted to say, when you look at these bubbles here, they're really just based on, you know, some fuel typing and structure density. And so we see these concentric, you know, circles around, you know, structure density. And although, you know, they've been useful, it's a first approximation of where we might want to focus our efforts in and around communities. They really don't really reflect where wildfire might move across the landscape, because they don't consider, you know, topography or weather. And so, you know, one of the things we're doing at FNESS right now, we've been working over the past year, developing variable WUI buffer zones that have the influence of topography. And so we're just, over the next year, we're going to be doing some field checks on this to kind of refine it. So as we look at the next slide here, we're going to just kind of zoom in a little bit on the you know, the WUI areas, and this is Lytton right here, Lytton, and you can see the various reserves that we have in and around the Lytton area. And as we kind of move up the Trans-Canada Highway here to a community called Nikamin, where we spent, you know, worked with the community for the better part of 10 years and actually designed and implemented treatment units around the community. There's, you know, really it's a small community with about 60 structures that was actually affected by wildfire. And we're going to just go into that right now and show you a little animation. So you could notice that the little bubbles, you know, the WUI bubbles around the communities based on structure density. So what is shown on your screen here right now is we took satellite imagery. This was from the MODIS satellite at this time. It's a satellite that measures heat signatures as it goes around the Earth. So we had our decision support department, big shout out to them, who they took this heat signature information and just overlaid it on this map. So you can see over the better course of a month, the Lytton fire, Lytton kind of burned to the ground at the very end of June. And so this represents about a month time period, as you can see how the fire moved across the land base over top of Nikamin in the center of your screen, and then spilled over into the Nicola Valley, into, you know, the Shaken Reserve and other you know, other municipalities that then exist in the Nicola Valley. So you can see that how fire moves across the land base, it really has no, you know, no effect on the WUI. The WUI does not represent how these fires move in and across. I mean, WUI areas right now only are kind of been designed on structure density and the proximity to that. This is just a shot. I talked about the Nikamin area. The fuel treatments around the community, there was not a structure lost. They were very effective in supporting fire suppression activities that happened on the ground. There was some back burning that happened within the fuel treatments. A lot of most of the trees around the communities are still standing and green. I was in with a team about a week after the fire had gone through, and we had a downpour for, you know, an hour or so, and you can see how all the soils were hydrophobic. This was in an area where we had, you know, rank 5 and rank 6 severe wildfire, and you can see how just from this small rainstorm, how everything pooled and didn't go into the ground. And this was a shot that we took in August 2021. You know, the water pool that kind of ran down into the community, took out, a mudslide into the playground, cut off a lot of the roads into the community, ran down, took out the CPR rail tracks, and then took out as well as the Trans-Canada Highway. Just from this debris torrents. And then when I mentioned a little bit about the wildfire spilling into the Nicola Valley, while these shots are from the Nicola Valley, we were in there working with the communities on humanitarian efforts to deal with some of the after effects of the atmospheric river that happened in November 15th of 2021. And so while we were just shortly before we arrived, there was about a 30-minute downpour rainstorm. And this resulted in, having these major debris torrents come down off the hillside that had been affected by that Lytton Creek wildfire in 2021. You saw from that last animation how it spilled over into the valley. And just walking around the site, everything was hydrophobic, and everything just kind of channeled into these small gullies, came down, took out Highway 8, and spilled into the valley below onto the Shaken Reserve, burying it in, 10 feet of mud in places. So just an example of how communities and values can be impacted from areas outside the WUI. There was salmon that were beginning to come into the Nicola River at the time here, and it was just totally loaded up with silt. And again, back to, I've got one more slide to show here with respect to the area around Actum by Cranbrook. So it's been in the news a lot, the Ackham burn and how successful it was. So if you look at my cursor here, this area here, this is the airport, the Rocky Mountain International Airport, and this area here was the area that was treated, about 1,200 hectares, that had fuel treatment and a prescribed burn that happened last spring. And then you can see there was a wildfire that started in July, and it started right about here on Ackham Reserve, and you can see the effects of the treatments that had occurred here, followed by prescribed burn. That's been again mentioned in the news a lot, and you can see how the wildfire didn't affect this area, right? It kind of ran, I got to be over, I think, 4,000 hectares. And again, just a testament to doing the fuel treatments in the spring at the right time, that it was very instrumental in saving the airport, as well as a lot of other houses that were located on the side of the airport. So now we're going to talk a little bit how does this stuff all fit together? And I know this talk is about biodiversity and connectivity, and so how do we go about helping kind of implement measures and treatments to address biodiversity, the natural environment, as well as the built environment. And so this next slide here is going to just talk about the how things are connected and the type of governance bodies that need to be established or built on to help us with this. So this cylinder just kind of represents about building this integrated spatial database to support a particular business need. And so we talked about watersheds and old growth and connectivity corridors, ungulate winter range, high value commercial timber, the list goes on. So in building this integrated database, we are feeding Bob Gray and his team's information around the values in both the natural and the built environment. Where are all the structures? Where are the community watersheds? Where are all the streams? Those types of values, rare and endangered species. So that information is being passed on to Bob and his team, so that they could model the outputs and where severe wildfire is likely to occur in those treatments. And Bob is also connected in with a group, Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions. They've got a lot of horsepower, linked into academia. There's a policy advisory team that, that Bob is working with on that front. And then we take this information, and then we funnel it into our spatial tools and products. And so what we're talking about here is to be able to take all this information, whether it's a desired future resilient condition map or potential, where the fire was saying is going to occur and impact the values. And we package that information up and we provide it, through viewing tools like ArcGIS, or FNESS has a tool called Lightship, which we use to display, share data, collect information, desired future resilient condition maps. Ministry of Forests is moving towards a new system called Forest Management System that we just recently had meetings on this week to make sure that we have interoperability in those systems to display and share information. And then this information is then kind of fed in. We talked about, we'll start to talk a little about the governance bodies that are needed. These are absolutely critical. Without these, it doesn't work. So to feed this information, the best information that we have into the first governance structure here I'm looking at here is the regional and local fire smart committees. So looking at where fire is likely to run in and affect communities, so that we can work with the communities and confirm project prioritization, project, funding, authorizations, how we might monitor the projects, how to support these regional and local fire smart committees with consolidated information that will allow them to collaborate and leverage their resources on projects. And right now, fire smart committees are funded through the Community Resiliency Investment Program in BC, and that's great. And they're there, and we're not exactly sure of how many committees are actually functioning in the province right now. But one problem that exists is that although these groups could come together, which is great for relationship building and explaining what projects they might be working on, they don't have access to collaborative, integrated spatial information that shows them where have the treatments been done in the past, where are treatments being proposed through the individual community wildfire protection plans or resiliency plans, where are the Forest Enhancement Society projects being planned on the land base, or a project that might be funded through Columbia Basin Trust. So we want to gather all this information together, and we can then plan and use the horsepower and the great people that sit on these committees to work and actually collaboratively plan. And we do have some committees that are working diligently on this. The Crescent Valley Fire Smart Committee, the Regional District of Central Kootenay working on this to kind of plan and bring all the data together so that it can be shared out with our partners, the Ministry of Forests, BC Wildfire Service, the community forests, and others as we move forward. And then another piece of governance that's really needed around the management for the natural environment. This does not exist right now, and we will be working with provincial agency representatives and others to see about the establishment of these committees. And that's the committees to deal with the natural environment and really to bring all this consolidated data and information together. Again, to confirm priorities on projects and the strategies and the funding and the authorizations and the implementation and the monitoring of the projects. And then, also to be able to work and say, well, we've got X amount of funding. I mean, we've only got so much, maybe we better kind of focus it in this area around the communities and, as well as the natural environment. So these communities have, these committees, like the regional and local fire smart committees, need to collaborate and plan with the regional kind of governance committees that are looking after the natural environment. So this information, then having this, provides us with great information to feed in workforce strategies, because they're going to be like, tens of millions, maybe, possibly $100 million worth of projects identified here, from these initiatives that can then feed in and support a workforce strategy. We know that working with First Nations, one of the major issues is that working on these project by project funding, that we might have funding, to do a Indigenous Service Canada project or community residency investment project that keeps them working for 4 months over the winter doing wildfire mitigation, and they might do wildfire fighting in the summer, but that's it. So if we have plans and projects put together that we identify, here's 10, 20 years of projects, we can work with a training initiative, we can work with the First Nations to give these folks career opportunities, which has all kinds of benefits socially, in terms of moving forward, having this. So this is really a critical piece. Also, this information will be important in feeding an old growth strategy, right? Because we've got where fires are likely to occur. Here's the values. Here's our best bet for managing for old growth. It might mean our best bet for recruiting old growth in certain areas of the land base. It will support landscape level planning that's occurring in the province as it's built to provide this information to help with that initiative, as well as to also link in with timber supply review or timber supply sensitivity. What does all this mean in terms of future wood supply? And we know that in the past, I used to work with the land use plan development some 30 years ago in the Kootenays, and what we found really, really beneficial, and it was the first time that was ever done, was we took all the spatial database and we linked it up to the timber supply model at that time, FSSIM, and we displayed the outputs, by decade of where the model was taking the wood from. And we were able to kind of work with industry and others to say, well, is this realistic? Yes or no? Is the inventory really there? Yes or no? This wood is here, but can we actually go out there and afford to harvest it because it's going to take X amount of dollars to build the road? So it allowed us to really kind of bring in all kinds of expertise in seeing where the models were getting the wood from around the landscape. And we've heard loud and clear from First Nations, that they want to see this visual representation, so to better kind of evaluate impacts throughout the land base. So this is just how this stuff all fits together. It's a continuum process. And it's a little busy, but hopefully I did a good job of trying to explain that. It's kind of complex stuff. So I'll just talk a little bit more about the strategies and actions around a workforce, so firefighting, fuel reduction treatments, ecosystem restoration, the list goes on. So and the governance structures, this was just an example of the technical working group and wildfire modeling team. FNESS is doing project coordination, creation of the database for the built in the natural environment that we'll be feeding. We are feeding to Bob Gray and his team right now. They're going to be getting some initial outputs here in March. And then as we move to the governance structure, which I talked about in the previous slide, these governance structures need to be supported by technical working groups, people, that are knowledgeable with respect to, connectivity corridors and all the work that's gone around them and where do the animals move. So how does that information get put into, priority treatments, in terms of prescription development and design through space and time, and making sure that we have the right people involved. It might mean having a parks representative, like for treatments that are planned in close proximity to the federal or provincial parks. And this information is then fed to this strategic planning group that again needs to be created. And I think these groups are being created to support landscape level planning. I used to sit on some committees in my past work called interagency managed committees, where representatives from multi-agencies could work together, see how we could work together in terms of prioritizing projects. First Nations, major partner at the table in all these technical committees. And then I talked about the existing committees, with respect to the fire smart committees, local and regional fire smart committees, to making sure that this information gets fed to the committees so that they can plan and design treatments, work together jointly, in getting projects implemented that again consider everyone's priorities and are done in a collaborative way to leverage resources, from all of these various funding sources at scale. And again, making sure that we've got treatment effectiveness monitoring in place. Like, what are we doing in terms of our treatment implement? Are they being effective? Are they meeting the desired intent? So we know that, one thing we've talked about FNESS is to have a ongoing standardized formal effectiveness monitoring program around the fuel treatment, so that, with using our technology, that every time a fuel treatment is intersected by a wildfire, that it triggers going out there on site after it's safe to do so, and looking at and talking to wildfire suppression folks, was the treatment effective in terms of altering wildfire behavior? If so, great. Or did it fail because of other reasons? It was the design was bad. It was in the wrong location. These types of things, like with respect to the fuel treatment, but also remembering that there's other types of monitoring that needs to be done around fire effects monitoring, where we want to, do burning in the spring, like on Ackham, and burn to get certain traditional foods, ungulate winter range enhancement, those types of things. So we need to know what we're monitoring for. And again, one of the things that we're working with at FNESS, we have signed on to a partnership, multi-hazard disaster resilient network partnership with the University of British Columbia and UBC Okanagan, to kind of tie into their horsepower to work, be able to work with us as we go forward to kind of help us out with our research and monitoring needs, tag into that horsepower. Also, some of the work we're doing will be very beneficial in terms of the existing task force mandate that we've all heard of, the Premier's task force, to kind of look at like how could we more effectively all work together to kind of mitigate risk to communities. And as well, likely many of you have heard about this new special report that came out from the Forest Practices Board around forest and fire management BC toward landscape resiliency. And what I just discussed and outlined in terms of the IFM process is pretty much in line with what was being recommended in this report. So some takeaway messages. We need to plan at the landscape level to mitigate risk to the natural and built environment. A spatial database is needed to support collaborative planning and enabling of sharing and leveraging of resources to implement projects at scale. We need to establish technical, regional, and local governance to identify priority projects and authorizations to support access to multi-program, federal, provincial, and regional funding, and use academia to support us with respect to effectiveness monitoring and adaptive management on the land base. That kind of concludes what I had to say. I probably went on a little bit longer. I see we've got about 6 minutes left for Q&A, so I'll leave it at that and turn it back to you, Haley.
That was great, Larry. I think that everyone will join me in congratulating you on a great talk and what an engaging presentation that is. Dane in the background, thanks for your support in developing that. It was just beautiful. I just want to mention before we hop into the Q&A, because Larry was mentioning Bob many times. So speaking about Bob Gray with the wildland, who's a wildland fire ecologist, we do have a CRED talk and a KCP webinar with Bob and his team last year. That'll give you an idea of what their prescribed fire work looks like. It's a really fantastic talk with his team, including Dr. Carrie Phillips with the Pacific Institute for Fire Solutions. So that's on both of our web pages with past recordings from these talks, just as a heads up there. So we're going to jump into the Q&A. We don't have a ton of time left, but we do have time for some questions, of course. Just a reminder, if you could direct any questions that you have, don't put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A, and I'll do my best to relay those. If there's a question there that you'd like to hear the answer to, give it a thumbs up, and I'll ask the questions in order of popularity, so to speak. So Larry, the first question, okay, there's a new one at the top here now. So it says, does the management include monitoring of the amounts of metals and chemical elements such as cadmium in lakes and ponds and wetlands after fires?
Well, I guess it could. I mean, if that's an issue that needs to be addressed, that's something that, you know, we could again work with the folks, you know, at the universities and others to actually, you know, if that was a priority, kind of implement some monitoring of that. But to date, in our involvement, any of the work I've been doing with FNESS, that has not been addressed.
Okay, interesting question though. So a question from Eric. He says, I also wonder if BC will follow the US service lead. This is like perhaps more of a comment than a question, but if BC will follow the US Forest Service's lead of creating burned area emergency response teams, which are comprised of experts in soils, geology, hydrology, engineering, botany, recreation, archaeology, and fisheries, along with GIS support and public information officers. I don't know if you have another comment on that.
No, we haven't been doing it, but obviously, you know, there's a lot of lessons to be learned for, you know, what's going on at the South. Like, for example, I do know that they do have a formal, mandatory effectiveness monitoring program for their fuel treatment. So anytime a fuel treatment is intersected by a fire, it triggers, you know, they've got forms that have been built to go out there on site to gather the necessary information and then put it in the system to kind of support continuous improvement. So that's something absolutely we could look at.
Okay, great, thanks. Question here from Brian. He says, are the opportunities to integrate your landscape level planning to inform modified responses to naturally occurring wildfire? Essentially, could this be used as a resource to direct the wildfire service to allow fires to burn where it is safe, and there are objectives to manage the WUI or ecosystem enhancement targets? I've seen a few fires locally that would have been ideal UWR, I forget how to say that, enhancement extinguished. Oh, they were extinguished when they could have been allowed to burn and have positive benefits.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that some of the products, strategies, and actions, which will be actually, you know, geo-referenced, spatially defined, and we work with those strategies and actions in partnership with, you know, BC Wildfire Community Reports, water, air, and land protection, the whole works. That we could get there. We could have that as a part of an output to help guide, you know, modified response. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Larry. Okay, we've got a question from Aiden. Is this database available on IMAP BC, or have you thought about adding it? It would be nice to have this as a category that you could go to with all these layers. Some of the info is already up there, but it takes some know-how to get it on a map.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's something we'll need to be talking about as we move forward. Like, what's the best way to kind of put the information in terms of a centralized hub so that it is accessible, you know, through such systems like IMAP BC. So getting the information out and available to view is absolutely critical. How we go about that needs to be defined, but good question.
Okay, all right. We're almost out of time, so I'll just ask one more question. And this one comes with a bunch of kudos, as I'm sure there are lots of other kudos coming up in the chat. I haven't had a look just yet, but Eric says this is really great with lots of exclamation marks. Building an integrated database with attribute and spatialized data. 20 years ago, the Ministry of Forests was creating an integrated system called, oh, where'd it go? Okay, called InCosata, but it got canned. I'm interested in your cool app, or I'm interested if your cool app will also be pulling data for the ministry's forest tenure administration and results. So silviculture activities and forest cover.
Oh yeah, it can do like it works, and maybe Dane can explain it a bit more, but like one of the things that Lightship works really good is it works off like an application program interface API, so it can draw information from all this. So I know that like results, fire perimeter data, any of that stuff like can be fed right into the system, as well as us, collecting data, on site, as part of the integrated spatial data. But yes, it can do that. You can draw all that in. You just have to define like what is as long as it's not, subject to OCAP, ownership, control, access, and possession kind of requirements, like for some of the First Nations data, or with rare and endangered species. But yes, that can all be brought in. You just have to define what information you need to support the business need, the question that needs to be addressed.
Okay, great. And I know I said one more, but I'll just do one more because I think this is probably a quick answer for you. And it was one of the first questions up. So this comes from Casey. Can you speak to the differences between the IFM Lightship app and the MOF Fire Management System app being developed? Are they integrated at all?
We had a meeting actually just with what the guy that's the behind forest management system, and with our technical group. Dane could probably talk to it if you want to pipe in there, Dane. But it's totally interoperable with us. It's all based on ISRAE kind of products, so totally interoperable. The bigger challenge, the bigger question is making sure we've got assembly of all this data, like this the treatment data that goes back right from 2004 onward. Like there's been over a couple $100 million spent on that data, on those field treatments, and we don't have a consolidated database of where all the field treatments are. And when you think about it, say when the air tankers are going out to do some response work around a community, they don't even have access to kind of where all these field treatments have taken a place on the land base. And with one of the objectives, making sure that retardant can penetrate the canopy, and they've been strategically placed. So that is our biggest challenge right now, is getting all this fuel treatment data, as well as others, into the system so that we can use it. But yes, with respect to the interoperability of forest management system, Lightship, or ArcGIS Online, not an issue.
Okay, all right. Larry, thank you so much. There's a whole bunch of kudos landing in the chat there for you. What an astounding amount of work has gone into this. I'm just going to go into some final thoughts. I'm getting an odd message on my screen. Can you see my slide now?
I can just see your Columbia Basin Trust slide.
Okay, perfect. So thanks. We're going to conclude this talk for now. And in doing so, of course, we want to say thank you again to all of our sponsors. A reminder to everybody that a recording of this talk will be available on both the KCP and CMI event web pages. And a little plug for next week's talk coming up with Tracy Lee. So next week, we'll be welcoming Tracy Lee, who is going to speak about roads, more roads, the plights of animal movement in the Anthropocene. Tracy, don't worry, it won't be too depressing. She had some really fantastic case study material to present, and is a fantastic speaker. Just a reminder at this point moving forward in the series that it would be wise to double check that you're registered for the last webinars in the remainder of the series. We're aware that there was a bit of a scrolling function in the registration form that wasn't highly visible for everybody. So as we move forward, just double check that you're registered for the talks that you would like to attend. And I think that's it from all of us. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll leave it live for a second so that Larry and Dane can check out the comments in the chat, and then we'll shut it down. Thanks.
Thank you.